Hello, dear ones, and greetings from the Center for Contemporary Mysticism in Philadelphia. My name is Joe Irwin, and it's a joy to gather with you again to explore this amazing journey that we share. Today, we welcome Karen Kinney, an author, an artist, explorer on the mystical spiritual path, and she'll be discussing the divine feminine and showing how it offers some amazing benefits that are often not found in a lot of patriarchal religions. Karen will examine topics like how do we embrace transition and navigate change? How do we use contemplation and stillness to fully embrace our own transformation? And in short, how does the divine feminine change how we experience life and show up in the world? So, welcome, Karen. We are honored to have you here. We've been looking forward to this, and thank you for your time and for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. So thanks.
Good. And we're going to always welcome back, as you know, Patricia Pierce is our regular interviewer. She is also an author, a former pastor, spiritual teacher, and host of the We Awakening podcast. And last, we want to take a minute and welcome each of you who are joining us live or those who are watching later on our YouTube channel. We're glad that you're here. And if you're new to the center, be sure and check out our website at simply contemporarymysticism.org. You'll find hundreds of resources, videos of past programs, speakers, interviews, groups you can join, such as weekly meditation, spiritual sharing groups, and different things. So check that out. And lastly, remember that our goal is to be a partner with you in your spiritual journey. So we invite you to get involved, volunteer, join, support, do whatever you feel called to help us continue this work. So we're so glad to have Karen with us today. And so without further ado now, I'll turn it over to Patricia and Karen, and I'll disappear and come back a little later for the Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Thank you very much. I'm just going to make a little adjustment on my screen here. There. Well, Karen, I've been looking forward to our conversation. Enjoyed sort of dipping our toes in recently when we were able to talk. And I've also been enjoying reading your second book, Doorways to Transformation. Today, though, we're really going to be focusing on the divine feminine and the feminine principle.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be just really curious to hear from you how you opened up to the divine feminine, how this really became a central part of your life, or maybe how the divine feminine found you, because sometimes it works that way as well.
Yeah, it's been an interesting unfolding, which I think that word is also very divine feminine-esque. When I look back and think, how did this kind of transition or sense of call, it's morphed into a sense of call, and how did that evolve? I was raised in a patriarchal religion, but even despite that, when I look back, there were so many ways that I would say the divine feminine was coming into my life through music, and creativity was a big one for me as a kid, and that transition into my adult years too. I think the creative process is very synonymous with the divine feminine in many ways. So that was one way I think I encountered her early in life. Nature is another one. And the contemplative kind of mystics, that whole vein of spirituality called to me pretty early in life. And I think just taught me another way of encountering the sacred outside of maybe more rigid patriarchal definitions of, or religious definitions of God and the divine. So these were softer avenues, and geographic moves have played a part of it as well. I'm from the Midwest originally, but I spent many years in Southern California, which has a lot of, I'd say, divine feminine energy, and people, and it's even part of the culture there, and at least some of the circles I was part of. So that was new to me when I moved there, experiencing that. And I currently live in Mexico and have been here for about 5 years, 6 years. And that as well has brought about just a deepening of being in cultures and around people that seem to embody a different way of being that's more feminine in nature, and that acknowledges that the divine is feminine. So it's, yeah, it's multi-layered, and yeah, it's definitely become a very deeply held passion. So.
Yeah. Did you have some sense that in your religious upbringing, that there was some dimension that was missing?
That's a good
that you
Mhm.
discovered the dimension was the feminine? Or was there anything like that that you sort of recognized, huh, there's something more that I have not been exposed to?
Yeah, maybe only in retrospect. Like, I
Mhm.
wouldn't say initially, because I actually had a very, many people don't, but I had a very positive experience in the church growing up, in terms of introducing me to the divine. It didn't come with a lot of baggage and maybe difficulty or things that a lot of people can experience. But so I think it was only in retrospect when I look back and see, oh, okay, this is, as with anything in life, we kind of begin with a very narrow understanding, or certain subcultures have a particular lens. And it's not until you move outside the subculture that you realize, oh, there's a whole nother world out here. So I think that's what it was for me, as moving. My part of my life has been, um, just naturally kind of led me to move outside of various subcultures I was raised in, whether that was the religious subculture or the Midwestern subculture. Certainly becoming an artist, you move outside of a traditional 9 to 5 work ideology. So I think that's been part of my journey. So I think that's what's then, when I look back, I can say, okay, that was a piece of, the pie, but it's a very, very large pie. And I think just having, I've always had such a really deep, innate spiritual hunger. So it's driven me to want to, oh, well, there's a bigger pie. Let's explore it. That excites me. Let's explore it. Let's dive in. It energizes me. So yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And you just mentioned that the creative process is really a very feminine kind of process. And I would just love to hear you talk about that and how you experience that. And also, like, for me, like being a fan of, say, Julia Cameron in The Artist's Way, and how the creative process also is a spiritual experience and a spiritual path. But
Yeah.
first, how do you see it as a distinctly feminine
Mm.
experience, the creative process?
Hmm. Sure. I mean, I think the first thing that comes to mind is it's very intuition driven. And so to me, the intuition and trusting your inner knowing is very much a part of the divine feminine. And I think with creating, you get these sparks of ideas that bubble up within you, or you have just a fleeting glimpse of something, and then you make another connection over here, and then you know, creation eventually comes out of you. And I would also say the unfolding nature of it, because, well, I would equate it with giving, kind of birthing something. Although at least with a human baby, that's a pretty specific timeline. So with creating, it can be years of birthing, but the whole gestation process where creative ideas are within you, and it can take, some come out more quickly, others take a long time. And that feels very feminine to me. It's not so much a linear or at all understanding of time per se. I mean, we can put those agendas on our creations, and sometimes those things are helpful. It's not to say that side of the brain that it's all about balance, but I think the genesis of creative ideas feels very feminine to me, that kind of gestation again. And for me, creativity is also about receiving and listening, because I think when we create things, they have something that they want to be. So we're not necessarily like a dictator per se, or someone who's like, I'm going to now, you know, delineate exactly what this will be. It's more like a partnership, where it's like, oh, this thing that's coming through me has something it wants to be. I'm trying to listen to it and partner with it to birth it. And yeah, all those analogies feel quite feminine to me.
Yes, it feels very collaborative in my experience. It's a very collaborative process,
Mhm.
and one that requires surrender. I mean, it's sort of like dancing on the edge of the unknown.
Yes.
And I think that that's also, when we think about the divine feminine, we think about, or at least I do, mystery, the darkness, the fertile darkness,
Yeah.
the receptivity, the very yin,
Mm.
um, as you said before, receiving.
Mhm.
So we talk about the divine feminine and such, but how would you describe you've started talking about this a little bit, but your experience of the divine feminine, and especially as an embodied experience. It's not, it's not just a head thing. It's not just an idea. Oh, this is the feminine principle, but it's actually an embodied experience. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's been very significant for me because I think I have a lot of like head energy too, because so I think it's when I first began exploring the divine feminine, it was more from that space, and that was a perfectly fine space to begin with. But I think, again, for the deeper layers that were awaiting me, I think moving to Mexico has helped me in the embodiment process. And some of the ways I think I've shifted, there's many ways. I mean, you mentioned the unknown and the darkness. I've become a lot more uncomfortable with things being undefined. I tend to be a very structured person. I'm the Myers-Briggs. I'm whatever the structured personalities, I'm that one, and I like dates and, execution and all that. And so the challenge in one of them in my life has been to be comfortable with the unknown, or with not knowing, having clarity right away. And I think the divine feminine has ushered me into, I think, a more easeful, if that's a word, or peaceful place with things being unresolved. And I think it's also helped me become a bit more pliable with the timeline of life, that, again, back to the whole idea of things unfolding, that I think I've learned, at least on my better days, to walk with a bit more trust in that things are unfolding the way they need to. The timeline, I can hold the timeline loosely, and I can hold the outcomes a bit more loosely. Because I think that one of the things the divine feminine does well is it embraces like the entire cycle of life, so we're not always on, like we're not always producing, or, life has its rhythms, and it has an ebb and flow with our work and with our relationships. And so I've become more comfortable and more allowing of that, as opposed to what I feel maybe in some of the more, and this may be just more American energy, but partly patriarchal, there can be more of an insistence on driving something through, that can sometimes overpower like process or pausing or embracing stillness, those kind of softer energies. So I think I've become more balanced as a person, and even in how I live in the world, and how I work.
Yeah, honoring that seasonal and cyclical nature of things, and that life is not a linear. It's not like we're going from point A to point B, but we are sort of like spiraling around these cycles of activity and repose, and receiving and then producing. How has, and your background is as an artist and now a writer, and how has your you've begun, you've touched on how you've experienced the sort of the wedding of the divine feminine and the creative process. In terms of the transitions that you've gone through as a person, as an artist, how has that deepened perhaps your experience of the divine feminine? How has the divine feminine helped you through those seasons of unknowing in your own life? And maybe you could give an example. Like you made this big move to Mexico, which is a big transition. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit, what that was like for you.
Yeah, I think yeah, geographic moves have played a big role in my own evolution. Mexico being a big one, and also moving to California. And I think the divine feminine, I think something it's good at is looking at the seeds of possibility, because again, with that kind of birthing energy. So for me, with geographic shifts, and especially with Mexico, there was kind of this sense in my soul that I was being called to this new geographic location, because it was a piece of it, or maybe the entirety of it, it was tied to the evolution that I personally was being called to next. And so I think in the midst of, the stress that comes with change, and the unknown of a transition, and having to learn new things, and all of those kind of factors, what kind of anchors me and keeps me grounded is just this sense of possibility. So what are the seeds of possibility I'm being called to live into in this next phase of life? And for me, like I said, the geography has happened to play a very instrumental role in kind of just supporting what I'm being called to step into next. So in regards to the divine feminine, my interest in the divine feminine and even my sense of call to be a voice for her has really deepened and grown stronger. And especially I would say over the past decade. So the Mexico move in particular, I knew intuitively that was going to be tied to deepening my own experience and lived experience of the divine feminine. I didn't know how that would manifest, but I knew that they were tied together in some kind of significant way. Yeah, does that answer?
Yeah, and how did that play out? How has that played out in your experience of the culture there? How has it sort of fortified or deepened just being in that context? What is part of that context that supports you in this journey more deeply into the divine feminine?
I think several things. One would be feeling much more deeply connected to a very intricate web of community, like on a whole nother level, only because the culture is so much more community driven or just relationship driven. The relationships are very, very high on the priority scale. And so I think being kind of immersed in this kind of really strong sense of connection to one another has been a big part. It lessens the sense of kind of isolation or like the Lone Ranger or some of the, like the independent, the side of me that I'm quite good at. Like I can be very independent and can get things done on my own and all those things you learn how to do. But I think being connected to community and learning how to receive has been a big part of my journey with the divine feminine. It's still not a natural impulse. I mean, I'm so used to, again, you do things yourselves but receiving help. Mexico is a very service-oriented culture. So everyone is always very willing to help and they offer help, whether it's in the stores or you're running errands and sometimes I have to remind myself, oh, this person's wanting to help me because I forget that they're wanting to help me with whatever, like to put my bag here or carry this. And an example of that, even the gas stations here, when you get gas, someone comes out, you don't get out, they come and do it for you. And this is a side note, I had a Spanish tutor in Los Angeles before moving, and she's from Mexico, but she lived in Los Angeles for maybe 20 years. And she said when one of her relatives came to visit her, they went to the gas station in the car and her relative's like, well, where's the person that's going to help us? She's like, oh no, there's no person. I mean, you need to get out and go. And
you're on your own.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a very small example, but when you have those tiny examples multiplied on a daily basis, it changes the way you even move in your day to day. So you're aware more of your connection to others. I think it creates a sense of more, not diplomacy. There's a courteousness to interactions. And I think another big one for me too is looking at time differently. I think specifically with Mexican culture, I've learned to be much more not as linear with time, or not much more flexible with time, and much more patient and much more, I mean, I'm not always patient. That's the goal, is to be patient, but I'm given opportunity to be in relationship with time in a way that feels much more feminine. Again, back to the unfolding, and timelines can look different and things take longer and some, and so that's shifted even how I operate in my days. My days aren't maybe as linear as they used to be.
Mm-hmm. And what about some of the traditions there, like Our Lady of Guadalupe, for example, and some of those practices? How have you experienced those?
Yeah, some of those have been very moving to me. Again, because growing up, I never saw images of the divine that were feminine. They were always masculine. And so that had a very profound effect on me that I wasn't expecting. For Guadalupe in particular, her image is really everywhere. All kinds of altars built to her, just her image on a wall. And she has a procession day every year in December. I think it's the 12th, but I forget. Anyway, the town, I lived in San Miguel de Allende for several years, and there's a big procession that honors her every year on her special procession day, and all the townspeople come out and they pray through the streets carrying images of her, like large statues. I mean, these are large size images. And the first time I saw that, it just really moved me, because here was a sacred feminine image being carried by a large group of men, because it was heavy. So, they needed a large group of men to be able to support what they were carrying her on. But it just touched me in a way that I didn't expect. And I think, back to your question earlier of, that I recognized growing up that something was missing. And I said to you, well, it's been more in retrospect. Seeing Guadalupe carried throughout the town, that was another lens of like, oh, something was missing, or it just wasn't complete growing up, because there's so many faces to the divine. And it's not even just, masculine, feminine, obviously it's much even beyond that, but the feminine is a aspect, and I just had never visually seen it. So the visual impact has been really profound for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can really appreciate that. I had a dream when I was on retreat a couple of years ago about a procession. I was on horseback and I was overlooking, it was this sort of plateau with sagebrush and things and scrub oak. And I'm looking down onto a village where there are people on horseback doing in a procession with a large banner of Guadalupe. And it was sort of one of those dreams that felt very archetypal, very archetypal. And my horse, when then like put its head down, like bowed its head, and its bridle fell off. And I mean, I did a lot of dream work on that, and I don't need to go into that, but I do just want to bring that up because the divine feminine is sort of in the air right now. I mean, these archetypal images, this feminine principle is very much on the rise right now collectively. And it's popping up in, people's dreams and people's life journeys, and where we feel called to go and how we feel called to be in this world. And you really have drawn on or lived into these and explored these divine feminine ways in your own transitions in your own life. And collectively, we are in a time of huge transition globally, and really moving out of, some of these former ways of being, patriarchal ways. So how do you see us collectively as, like, how can the divine feminine help us through this turbulent time that we're in right now, between these eras?
Yeah. Well, yeah, one thing that kind of comes to mind is not being afraid of the crumbling piece, right? The old structures and the old paradigms and the ways that are crumbling. I think sometimes when that's happening, it's easy to get alarmed, or, to focus on everything that's breaking down. But I think the divine feminine, I think she not only invites us to be okay with darkness, but also, again, she's like this seed carrier. So in the midst of, the darkness and the crumbling of prior things is the perfect ground for new things to be birthed. And so I think, for me anyway, that always brings me hope. And I think that's certainly something that's needed in times where, headlines every other day can leave you feeling not really hopeful. But I think if you look at the larger story going on, is there something new that's asking to be birthed in the midst of all the things that no longer work? That I think can bring hope, and it can also be exciting. And I think it can bring a sense of empowerment, because again, I think collectively we can feel very disempowered, like these problems are so huge, and how can I as a person shift these large global topics? That feels very overwhelming, and makes me kind of want to just take a nap on the couch or something to escape that reality. I don't know. But instead, it's like, if you can bring it back to the personal level and look back with this kind of seed of possibility, is there something new maybe asking to be birthed globally? And if so, where do I personally fit into that? And that excites me, and I think is what where I like to, it's been a helpful place to put my focus in the midst of, like you said, all these vast kind of changes that the globe is going through. Because I think because the divine feminine is more fluid, and she's a birther of new things, it's it also brings a focus on evolving, like we can transform on transformation, because we're not locked in to like a rigid or more linear understanding of myself or my role or how the world works. If we can release some of that more linear thinking and adopt kind of more the winding perspective, the winding path of exploration, and then find how do we align with that personally, and are there ways I'm being called to evolve that line up with possibly the new thing that wants to be born. And then it becomes a place of, oh, I'm actually growing and transforming through what appears to be, on some levels, a very dark, kind of fearful time where the old order isn't working. So it is kind of shifting the focus, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, I think often of the, just sort of, thinking metaphorically of when birth actually happens, that it is, I mean, in a way you could say it's, I don't want to say destructive, but the baby is pushed out. It's a very like,
Yeah.
it's not a comfortable thing, and being pushed out of everything that it has known. And I think that's, we, if we don't know what's happening at the bigger scale, if the baby doesn't know, oh, you're going to get on the other end of this birth canal and it's going to be great, and you're going to see light, and you're going to see faces, and you're going to, find out what air is, and, all of that. So I think for us, oftentimes that fear is like, we don't know that we're actually being birthed into something. And so we try to hang on, to what we have known. And it just makes the process really way more difficult than it would need to be. It's like, we're doing the breech birth rather than the easy way. Oh, yeah. So you currently are working on another book, right, about the divine feminine. Can you tell us about that and what you're really exploring in your writing, and what the writing process has been like for you as you worked on that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I felt a stronger and stronger call to the divine feminine. And part of that is being a more intentional voice for that on the planet. And so for me, that would come through writing, because I'm a writer. And so this particular book I'm working on is really just an exploration of the distinctions of a feminine spiritual path. How is it different maybe from patriarchal models that our culture's been steeped in for a long time? And how is it different, and why is that important? I think I want to look at that. Like, why does that matter? Because I can see a lot of people thinking, okay, well, that's nice, but does this actually matter? And I think it does matter. I mean, it's a piece in as you're talking about, the larger evolution that our planet is going through. And it's just, again, I think one of the things our planet is needing is a just more diverse array of voices in general, in all kinds of spheres that have not been heard or not been part of the dominant power structures or conversation, because those things bring healing. And so anyway, so I want to look at the distinctions of a feminine spiritual path and why that matters. And I also want to include different stories from people interspersed throughout the book of what their journey has been. Because again, I think, there's no one way to have a journey in the spiritual realm or with the divine feminine. So I'd like to have a variety of personal stories of people, and just have them share what does that look like for them. Because it can take so many different forms. Because I think part of, one of the things that I like to try and do with my writing is offer kind of an energy of freedom with whatever. My first book was about creativity, and so no matter the topic, but I think with the divine feminine, and it relates to people's spiritual journeys, one of the things I hope to do or aspire to do with my writing is offer a sense of freedom, that there's a larger either container or a different paradigm, or there's wherever people might be feeling stuck or limited in how they experience the divine, or how they think about it, there's a way to expand into like a broader, freer pasture. So I'd like to embody some of that energy, and however the words end up coming out. So the writing process has been very, you asked how that was. It's been very kind of, I would say, on and off. There have been times I've felt very focused with a lot of the writing happening, and then quieter times where I'm not quite sure what I will be saying next, or so. But again, that's part of the cyclical process, which I've fortunately, the creative path has helped me become much more comfortable with. So I don't fear in the quieter times, like, oh, will I ever birth this book? It will be birthed, but I'm more comfortable not needing to know exactly when. So
Yes. Well, given that most of us probably were raised in a patriarchal paradigm,
yeah.
first of all, how would you distinguish the difference? And secondly, how do you find, how would I say this? What would you suggest to people to help them begin to open up more and more?
Mm,
When we talk about the divine feminine, it's easy to think about it as something outside of us, but it isn't. It's something within us, both women and men. Like, this is an energy. This is an essence within all of us.
mhm,
And how can we really open up to it more and more deeply? Because it has been so suppressed
yeah.
in our cultures, well, at least in the US culture, and in our own psyches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think well, one thing would definitely be learning to trust your own inner knowing. Because I think one of the distinctions for me of a patriarchal, I mean, not, in general, these are kind of generalized experiences, I guess, but in a patriarchal model of spirituality, it tends to be more of a top-down authority structure, more hierarchical. There's someone kind of in charge, and then there's different, layers coming down. And I think one of the downsides of that, well, I think there's many downsides, but one of them is that it keeps you from trusting the fact that you have your own innate internal connection to the divine. So there doesn't need to be an external authority necessarily helping explain it to you or helping connect you to the divine, or whatever roles we ascribe to kind of those structures. And so I think learning to trust your inner authority and your inner knowing is for me a real hallmark of a feminine spiritual path. And I think with that, it's kind of learning to get in touch more with the state of our soul, without sounding too kind of, what does that exactly mean? But I think the divine feminine is much more nurturing, a nurturing force that's concerned with the state of our soul. So it's not so much an external code that we're conforming to, which feels more like a patriarchal model of spirituality. There's a lot of external, just either rules or knowledge or things that keep you out of touch with your own body and with your own sense of well-being. And so again, being able to go inward and look at how your soul is doing, and to allow for like nourishment and refilling and things that are nurturing. And again, back to this whole idea of receiving, as opposed to having the external focus of either on structure or producing or output. Or for me, a lot of patriarchal spirituality, it focuses on the external in many ways. And so, yeah, those are some of the things that come to mind. I think, how can we allow for that? I think the mystical path, which I'm sure you are well acquainted with, I know, being the Center for Contemporary Mysticism, I think that helps a lot because again, you're learning to be more listening to your environment. So whether you're practicing stillness or being in nature, you're learning to experience the sacred kind of all around you, and it gets freed from kind of the box that I think patriarchal religions, or any system really, but religions are a system, and they create a box. And so when we can remove the box, or at least put ourselves in settings that are outside of the box, we have a greater chance of starting to observe, like, oh, well, there's the sacred there, and it's there, and like I'm seeing glimpses of it in all these new and surprising ways that free us up from kind of maybe a more narrow understanding.
Mhm. Yeah, and you've mentioned a couple times being in nature, and for me, that's also a biggie in the experiencing my own, to use Thich Nhat Hanh's word, but my own interbeingness, my own interrelatedness with all of life, and which is very much, you know, what the divine feminine is about. As you mentioned earlier, the relatedness
Mhm.
and our mutual kinship with all life, and just being present to that and receptive to that and
Mhm.
honoring of that.
Mhm.
Yeah. So do you know when your book will be coming out? I mean, not to impose a deadline or a timeline,
No, I know,
but
I know.
if you know, do you have any sense of that?
I don't yet. It's still, I would say it's still too early in the process. So I would say it's probably a couple of years.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
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 This is very, yeah, just early. And it's also, you know, part of me feels like there's a piece of this book, and I suppose it's true for most writers. Well, it depends what they're writing, but that you're living a piece of what you're writing. And so I do feel that a bit with this book. So but in my ideal world, it'd be no more than like a few years. At least
Yeah.
coming out by then. So I could
Yeah.
see, but probably
Yeah.
not.
And that's also the collaborative nature of it. I mean, there's, I know when I've, you know, been engaged in writing projects, things will just like show up or they'll just arise. And I didn't know that was going to be
Yeah.
coming. So just to be open to new things that might want to show up and be included.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, Karen, how can people connect with your work before we move on into the Q&A? You have a website that people can visit.
Yeah, my website is my name, so it's KarenKinney.com. And so that would be the place to go. And then you can find all the ways to connect. So my email's on there, and social media if you like that. And yeah, you can find all of that there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great, great. Well, thank you so much, Karen, for taking time to be with us today. And we're going to transition now to the Q&A time. And if people have a question, you can raise your hand, and then Joe is going to come on in a moment, and you can come on as a panelist and actually talk to Karen yourself. If you're shy and you don't want to turn your camera on, you can put your question in the Q&A, you can type it in. But I think it'd be great to hear some other people's experiences of the divine feminine, and for people to be in conversation with you about that. So I'm going to ask Joe to come back on, and I'm going to turn off my video, and he will lead us in the Q&A time. Thanks again, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia, for that enlightening interview and timely with Karen. We do have some questions, some hands that are raised. There's a question from Charlotte. So the way we do this, Charlotte, is you will see a little button that says join as a panelist. And when you see that, you need to click it and then click start my video, and we'll bring you right on to talk with Karen. So if you see that, go ahead and click come on as panelist. Do you see that? Maybe she's having a hard time. Well, she didn't come on. Okay, sorry about that. What about Janet Mather? Looks like she has a question, Janet. So if you'll click come on as a panelist and start your video, you'll have a chance to talk with Karen. Unmute.
Thank you. Thank you. I actually had two questions, which are probably related. One is what helps you most to listen to and receive and connect to the divine feminine? And have there been times that you have had trouble following?
Mm-hmm.
Have you had times of resisting your
Yeah.
intuition, your inner knowing, and your guidance?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Those are good questions. I think so. How do I connect best? I think it's when I can create space and stillness, and also put myself in a very kind of nurturing, what feels to me a nurturing environment. So as I mentioned a couple times with Patricia, nature's always been important to me, and often being somewhere where either I'm in nature or I can have a view of something that has a calming effect. Having my environment kind of be this nurturing, calming place helps me enter that nurturing, calming place. And then I can always hear more easily in those times. But I definitely have resistance to creating those spaces for myself. Because every time I do create them, I have the thought, like, why don't I do this more often? This is so transformative for me, or it's allowing new insights to come forth, or, it's helping me get unstuck wherever I was feeling stuck. But I struggle with, I'm a very task-oriented person and goal-oriented person. I like making lists and checking things off my list. I'm that kind of person. So, and the culture affirms that. So, when you're good at something that the culture affirms, it's harder sometimes to choose the opposite. And so I think allowing for space where nothing appears to be happening, that can be hard for me, because I'm subtly believing, oh, there's less value to those times. I know that I have that. So I know that belief isn't correct, but it's there, and sometimes drives me to times of busyness that really it'd be wiser to choose to abstain from that and go and be still, So does that answer what you were asking, or did you want more clarity?
I guess I was also thinking, well, when your intuition said go to Mexico,
Oh, I see.
I can imagine there being people around you who would say, "What? Are you crazy? Why are you doing this?" And
Right.
just your own resistance possibly to doing what feels like the right next step, and the resistance of other people to
To what you're doing or what I'm doing.
yes.
Yeah, I think, well, for me with intuition, it's I'm a very measured personality. So I'll say that. So I'm actually not someone who would say, I have an impression and then I'm gonna fly to India or wherever. I'm not that kind of person. I'm too structured and planner, much of a planner. So I take my intuition and I kind of tend to live with it over time and kind of test it, so to speak. Like, okay, I hear this idea coming in or this prompt, and let's explore that. So I don't actually, my personality isn't such that I do things without a lot of thought. And I think that's okay. I mean, we have to work with who we are. And so I think for me, I test kind of intuitive insights or prompts I receive over time. And I kind of take small steps to feel them out. So even for the Mexico thing, well, we just decided, I'm referencing my husband and myself because it's two of us. Let's go visit this town, and we did, and then we came back. And then I went back a year later and did a mural project, and then we came back. And then I went back the following. So it was actually a very gradual process. But that fits who I am. And that's not to say it doesn't have to be gradual. That's just more my personality. So that helps me with it's a less scary way for me to begin to trust my intuition, because I allow myself to take small steps towards it and be okay with that, and not expect myself to just make a huge leap in whatever direction. So, but in terms of resistance, even for me talking about the divine feminine, I've had a lot of resistance to that. So I practice that. And believe me, when this next book comes out, it's why I kind of said, oh, I think it'll be a longer timeline. I mean, it's partly because it's in the early stages of writing, but it's also because I have fear around being a voice for the divine feminine. I mean, I was raised in a certain religious culture that tends to be more closed. And so I find closed systems often aren't as open to broader ideas, but my whole life path has been about broadening. So to then become more public with a broader voice is a bit scary for me, because for whatever, I fear reaction from people maybe who are in a more closed way of thinking or aren't interested. And so I have all those things. So that would definitely fit in with resistance. And it's definitely there for me. And so I have to choose what I'm going to listen to. Is it the resistance, or is it this kind of stronger sense of, no, I actually think I must do this, but I think being gentle with self helps me. I'm not very good at being gentle with self, but I try to, extend gentleness in my journey. So.
Thank you,
And
Janet. Oh, was there more?
well, I speak Myers-Briggs. Can you tell me what your type is?
Yeah, I'm an INFJ.
I thought so. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you. I really appreciated so much, Karen. You're talking about, how you can be task oriented, and
Mm.
I share some of that same thing, in that I really try to meditate each day and just quiet the mind. And at times, I will almost look for excuses. It's like you hear the phone, even though it's on silent, you hear it vibrating over there, and then you want to say, "Oh, okay, maybe I better get that. That might be something important." And I've
Yeah.
learned ways not to let that happen. But I did want, before we go to another question, just to ask you to share a little about your relationship with the divine feminine, even more on a devotional or interpersonal way. For example, do you meditate? And when you do you connect or pray to or talk with the divine feminine? Do you ever at times have an experience of the divine feminine, the divine mother being, you know, with you, present where you are? These sorts of more inner devotional things that to me are very important. And I have a strong attraction to growing more in my relationship with the Divine Mother, because
Mhm.
I think it has as much or more to offer to men as it does to women,
Mhm.
because we need it. But at the same time, just share just a little about your own personal, quiet, inner meditation with this.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it has been like a conscious kind of switch for me to practice engaging with and talking in my inner dialogue with a divine feminine presence. That's been something I've had to consciously choose and try on and see how that feels. And I think some things that have helped me with that, there's some music that has helped me with that, that references the divine as goddess and other uses other feminine terms for her. That helps me with my kind of just envisioning of a feminine presence who I'm dialoguing with. And then I think anytime I just again experience this sense of nurture in my inner dialogue, that feels very feminine, like, oh, I'm connecting with her, you know?
Mhm.
And again, back to nature, even specific things speak to me, whether it's a flower. I mean, it's actually quite frequent, whether it's a tree or a flower or a leaf, and feeling I receive messages from them. And those also feel very feminine to me. And I think it's because I'm a visual person. It helps me to be looking at something. So that's why, again, why that nature helps, because anytime I just choose to sit in an environment where I have the natural world around me,
Yeah.
anything in that environment, well, then there'll be a message from
Yep.
like rock or, anything that's just there. And that feels much more like the divine feminine to me.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I want to just footnote mention here our next program, which is in 4 weeks. Will continue the discussion on the divine feminine, and it's entitled, and it will be an in-person meeting as well as hybrid. It's entitled "The Divine Feminine: Songs, Stories, Meditations, and Healing from the Divine Mother." And so I think that is going to be good training for me and maybe for you,
Yeah.
those of us who are so, task oriented and accomplishment oriented, to kind of draw it all in and just kind of bask in the
Yeah.
beauty and the presence of the Divine Mother. And so that's 4 weeks from today. So be sure and mark that or check our website. Well, we do have some more questions, so I want to get to some others. There's one from Cliff. So Cliff, if you will come on as a panelist and start your video, we'd love to hear your question.
Mhm.
There we go. Oh, okay. Come on.
There you are. There you are, Cliff. Thank you. Go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Karen. I've got a couple questions, but I've got I've been, as you've been talking, wondering. So I'm going to share my wondering and ask you to comment on it. I was struck by the whole, I guess it's a continuum between the private and the relational. And I had this image of a story of a person coming to the divine at night so as not to be seen, kind of cloaked, all private, right? and turning it around and saying, well, maybe it's by night that we come to the divine, by all the mystery of what we don't know, of walking into what is dark and unclear, that brings us to the divine. That might be a silly notion, but can you talk about that and share any thoughts you might have of that imagery?
Yeah, I appreciate that imagery. Well, I immediately thought of the idea of surrender as you were sharing that, and when you're talking about what we don't know and everything that's kind of mystery is another word. I feel like, yeah, as much as I do enjoy, like, the headspace and thinking about ideas and expand, all of that, I think the most peace for me really does come in those places of surrender. And to me, that feels very key, or what you're sharing feels very potent, that it's an important portal, maybe in the midst of all the inquiry that we do, of being in that place of darkness and the unknown, or the things that are disguised that we can't see clearly, and being able to be. I don't know, maybe that's part of one of the core parts of being, is that when we're in that energy most fully, it's easier to surrender all the other stuff and the trying to figure it out. And the good things, none of that stuff is wrong. Or like I said, I'm one of the biggest kind of explorers there is, in terms of I want to understand and know, and oh, that's fascinating and that's fascinating. But maybe at the end of the day, releasing the need for any of that and being able to be one with presence. I mean, that sounds pretty powerful to me. I don't know.
Thank you. No, that's good. I'm gonna take that word surrender with me, and just to be in the presence of what is. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Yeah.
That's beautiful, Cliff. Thank you so much. And maybe we have time for one more question. I see that David has a question. So David, if you'll click on join as panelist and start your video, we'll invite you to have your question for Karen. There he comes. Yeah, go ahead.
Great
Hello?
talk. I enjoyed it. Joe, I'm going to ask about another aspect of what Joe was starting to get at. You speak in very general terms about the energy and the sense of the divine feminine, having you do this versus that. Was there any really singularly powerful experience? I mean, us men like transcendence, right? And you have a strong masculine aspect, obviously, as a lady. Was there any really singularly strong, powerful experience of a vision or bliss or some kind of initiation, or a spell of extraordinary love that didn't last long but was really powerful when it happened?
Just in general, or specifically?
Well, the one big experience, I mean, a lot of us have initiations in one sort or another, whether formal or informal, and that's the start of the whole thing,
Yeah, I think for me, my spiritual path has maybe been more gentle. It's been I have a lot of dreams. So in terms of maybe things that feel a bit more supernatural, that the dream world's very powerful to me. In terms of receiving symbols or guidance for my life, I feel like I've had significant, fairly potent, prophetic dreams at different seasons of my life that gave me guidance that was probably the only way it could come to me. But in terms of strongly felt experiences, this is back to psychology. I'm a HSP, which is a highly sensitive person. So the tiniest little stimuli make a very significant impact in me, which has been interesting when I look at my spiritual journey. So to answer your question, I don't feel like I've ever had what I would say was like, a super strong initiation moment where before everything was one thing and after, everything changed, or in terms of experientially. But I also wonder if that's because the divine knows I'm the kind that might crush me. I'm such a sensitive, I don't know how to describe this. I'm so sensitive to my environment that it's almost like a slight whisper or a slight rustling in the wind of like a leaf is like what and I take things in really deeply. So maybe a more potent experience. I'm not sure, because I've been part of a lot of different spiritual circles where people are having more of those experiences, whether it's a shamanic journey or in the charismatic community and Christianity, some very kind of supernatural, strongly felt things, but I wouldn't say that's, I don't have anything like that I can point to where it's a very, yeah, so I don't know if that makes sense, but
the communal culture in Mexico is good for that, to tone down those. Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for that question. Again, I relate, Karen, to you and kind of our approach to things. I'm the same way in that while I think of my spiritual journey as being many, many years, 30 or 40, 50 years, as I used to tell people, Jesus never jumped out from behind the shower curtain in the bathroom and said, I'm here. It was a slow, it might be because I'm a slow learner, but it was a gradual transition of not having the answers and not being fulfilled with the way in which I was reared, and beginning to seek and to search. And, I did the route like many people do, study all the Eastern religions and come all the way around again and end up to realize our Christian tradition has as much mysticism as anything in it.
right.
In fact, Christ was pretty mystical himself. So the point I'm making is, I think it exactly, and David points this out. It comes to us in different ways. Now, since that time, I have had some rather, kind of small phenomenological events, like my father coming to me in a dream that seemed to be more in a dream. And when I woke up and started walking around, I smelled his shaving lotion that he always wore very thickly in the room, and I came to the belief that he was in fact there. And so this is the reason I was asking, about setting aside time to be still and to be silent and to listen and to intentionally, work toward developing a relationship with the Divine Mother. Because I think as we do that, these things will happen. And I'm like you, I think, in that if they had happened real early, I would have just written them off. I'm too logical. And so I think Spirit had to sneak up on me, kind of give me small little doses and get me hooked. And so I think that is that's worth, taking a look at. Well, listen, this has been so wonderful. I'm going to ask Patricia if you would come back on. And after hearing some of our questions and dialogues, wondering if you have any last questions or thought you might want to share with Karen before we start wrapping it up.
Yeah, I don't know that I have any questions. I do sense that, if we were in a room together, I have a sense we would all sort of sink into more that experience of presence and actually invoking, if you will, the divine feminine in our midst and within. I think that maybe comes back to the whole relational component and embodied nature of the feminine principle. Maybe, Zoom has its great aspects, and there's a deeper, another dimension that we could tap into if we were in a different setting. But I just want to thank you, Karen, for sharing, your journey and for your willingness to be a spokesperson for the divine feminine, because I think that's just so important. And I can really relate to and appreciate maybe the slight trepidation you have about the book that you're working on. I know in my life I've, published some things and I was like, like the people who've known me all my life, how are they going to be responding to this?
Right.
And I don't know if this is any, consolation, but I have discovered that people on the whole have been much more open-minded than I had anticipated. So I guess it comes back to what you said before about trust and how living in that feminine energy really does let us sink into that experience of trust.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. That's a good encouragement too. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you so much, both Patricia and Karen. This has been a wonderful time together. I think even in the spite of Zoom, even though we're not physically together, I can feel some of the presence, I think, just as we raise this whole issue. To me, I feel that presence. So also, like I mentioned before, I'll remind you again that in 4 weeks, our next program is going to be taking this a step further, and we'll have the opportunity to do some maybe some chanting, some meditation, all focused on the Divine Mother. And I think for me as a left brain person, that's going to be helpful, you know, to begin to let go of all the preconceived notions and just kind of give way, as Cliff said, to kind of the mystery of what we don't know and let it speak to us. So today is just a perfect setting for opening that door, Karen, and we so much appreciate you being here and taking time to be with us. So you've given, if somebody wants to know more about your work and your upcoming book, it's your website, Karen Kinney, Kinney, is it .com?
.com.
And the same with Patricia. She has a wonderful website, and you can learn more about her We Awakening podcast and companion groups and other things. And that's Patricia Pierce, spelled PEARCE.com. And lastly, as I've mentioned, be sure and check out, if you're new to the center, our website, which is contemporarymysticism.org. So we're so glad that you've been with us, Karen, and all of you out there in Zoom land and those who are logging in on YouTube land. So thank you so much for being with us. Stay safe, be well, and remember, you are perfect just exactly as you are. Namaste.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Have a great day.